You're listening to Science Coast with Mallory Havens and
Chris White.
Welcome back. And today I wanted to ask Chris, as my boss, technically, how he got...
I thought Jerry was your boss.
No, my chair is not my boss. You should know that, as my boss.
Oh, clearly I'm not qualified for my job.
So he tells me all the time he's not my boss. Or does he tell me he is? I don't remember. Regardless, I wanted to talk to you about your career path because I'm sitting here as a person who is currently an associate professor. And you are sitting here as a person who is a dean of a college, who also has been involved in international scientific collaborations. But once upon a time, theoretically, you were a child.
Yes. I remember the day. I was sitting in third grade.
It's just a day.
That's right. It was one day.
So I was wondering how you got to where you are career-wise and what that looks like, especially thinking about people who may be listening who want to know how they achieve certain positions, what that path looks like. So if you want to be a university administrator, which I have never met a third grader that you say, what do you want to be when you grow up? And they say a university administrator. But should we meet one of those children? Or if somebody,
I would advise them to do something else.
Or if somebody is, say, in a PhD program and they're interested in how institutions are run, or maybe even an undergraduate, like how do you get to where you are?
Yeah, I guess the first piece of advice that I would give is don't try to over-constrain your career, and you have to be open to where it naturally flows.
Right.
And focus on what you're doing in the moment, do a really good job, and opportunities will present themselves. So you just have to be open. And so would I have forecast the direction that my career took? Absolutely not. Opportunities presented themselves, and then there were various, forks in the road, so to say, that I had to make decisions which direction I was going to go. But there was no grand plan, and the whole idea of getting into a university administration wasn't something that I'd thought of until one of the university administrators walked up to me at a Christmas party. The provost walked up to me at a Christmas party and at Illinois Tech and basically said, "Vice Provost, think about it." There were a few additional words associated with it, but that's really what I heard in my head.
Yeah.
And I was a professor at the time, and I remember going to my dean and saying, "I think the provost is asking me to become a vice provost in his office." And he was like, "Oh, you probably know that didn't happen," but it turned out to be true. And so then an official email offer said that they were very seriously thinking about me, and I had not even contemplated that it was possible to move into the provost's office like that until the provost just basically said, "There's this job here. We'd love for you to do it. Are you interested?" And so then that's when I really dove into upper administration, as they say.
I guess I should say, I obviously working at a university understand these positions, but if there's someone listening who doesn't know, what is the role of a vice provost, a provost, a dean?
The best way is to start from the top. So the university has a president, and the president of a university is typically outward facing.
And wears a suit.
And is, in some sense, the face of the institution. The president is the one who is going around, holding babies and shaking hands and telling everybody about how awesome the institution is. And in many
fundraising.
And yes, I was going to say in many institutions, the primary job of the president is to acquire the resources necessary to make sure that the institution is sound and running the way that it ought to. And there is governance associated with that the president's approval is required for a lot of things. But it's really an outward-facing type of a position. The provost, who is the senior vice president, is typically inward-facing and is responsible for everything that happens on the campus. So, for example, here at Lewis University, the athletic program reports to the provost, not the president, directly. And the provost is trying to make sure that all of the programs sync together and that the experiences that we deliver to our students are what they are supposed to be. Underneath the provost, on the academic side of the house, are the deans of the various colleges. So a university is typically is composed of multiple colleges. Here at Lewis University, we have 5.
Right.
We have the College of Business, we have the College of Fine Arts, Humanities, and Communications, we have Social Sciences and Education, we have Nursing and Health Sciences, and of course, the best college, Aviation, Science, and Technology.
No bias there.
No bias there. And so then the dean is the senior administrator for the college. So there are 5 deans at Lewis. And then within each college, you'll have individual departments. So like in Coast, we've got aviation, we've got biology, chemistry, physics, and then engineering and computer and mathematical sciences. On the other side of the provost house are the vice provosts. And the vice provosts typically are managing not faculty, but staff. So those are the offices on campus that keep the trains running on time. The registrar's office, undergraduate academic affairs, graduate academic affairs. So the people who are responsible to make sure that when students graduate, they've actually satisfied all the graduation requirements.
Sure.
So the academic side of the house is delivering the academic experience, and then the vice provost side of the house is making sure that the administrative piece is all running correctly.
So what's the best part of being a dean?
I love, as it turns out, I didn't realize this when I was younger, but I like working with people. An administrator's job is really just all about people. When I remember very clearly the difference when I moved from being a research faculty member, and I taught my classes and I worked with my students, and I did my service and research and such, but when I moved into an administrative role, it was not about me anymore. It was literally not about me. It was about how I can facilitate other people's success. And, what do I do to help all of the faculty, or if when I was a vice provost, all of my staff, do their jobs. And a lot of it is just keeping people from killing each other. I'll just frame it that way. I remember when I was a grad student, one of the scientist who served as my primary mentor was a staff scientist at Brookhaven National Lab, Dr. Alan Carroll. And one day I remember he just looked at me, and he was serving as the spokesperson, the lead scientist for this experiment. And he looked at me and he goes, "I think my main job is just to keep the experiment from exploding from within."
Yeah.
And because you have lots of highly educated people who are very opinionated, who all think that they're correct. And when you get a lot of those people, how can 100 people all be the smartest person in the room at the same time?
Yeah, it's actually impossible.
So then I often see my role as figuring out how to navigate and negotiate those shoals, those rocky areas.
How do you go from being like a particle mover and shaker, if you will, a particle physics mover and shaker, to an administrator? Like, how did you walk away from the bench?
Oh, well, I didn't actually walk away until I came here to Lewis University. So when I was a vice provost at IIT, I was still actively involved, and I had a research program, and I had an external grant, et cetera, et cetera. And it was getting increasingly difficult to do both things. So when I made the switch to Lewis University, I decided that I would just put my entire heart and soul into the college. And I didn't want to try to be torn in two different directions.
Do you miss research?
Yes and no. There's parts of it that I don't miss. I mean, there have been lots of experiences in my life associated with my research where I remember, for example, before I even was a faculty member, I was referred to as the physicist in charge, which basically meant when all of the senior faculty were gone, he's the one you call. And when there was a problem with the experiment, my name was the first one on the list. And so I remember getting phone calls at 3 o'clock in the morning because when the experiment is running, it's 24/7. Mm-hmm. You're taking data constantly. And so the grad student calls me up and says, "We're getting this error message. What do I do?" And as physicist in charge, it was my job to figure out what they should do to get the experiment running again. But it was one of those experiences. I think what I was going to say is I loved the experience. It was amazing, but I never, ever, ever wanted to do that again.
Wake up at 3 a.m.
In the moment, the adrenaline rush, the idea that, everybody's relying on me to know what to do and to have such a deep understanding of how the experiment works that when somebody says, well, this is the error message that I'm getting, I said, yeah, okay, so you have to go to rack 3, crate 2, slot 5, and jiggle this cable and everything will work again.
That's so
and
technical.
You think I'm joking.
Cable jiggling.
No, you think I'm joking, but when you have these incredibly complex experiments, sometimes it does boil down to, a loose connection on a connector. And how many times have people had their mouse isn't quite working right? And the first thing you do is check to see whether the cable's plugged in.
Right.
And so literally you have these multi-million-dollar experiments that are boiling down to, cables. But yeah, so there were these experiences. I was so glad that I did them. I learned so much from these experiences, but it's like I did it. I did it once. I'm happy. I'm good. And the same thing happened like with the diabetic experiment. I was a project manager. I was traveling a lot. I ended up being, co-editor for multiple papers, for the collaboration. And at the end of the day, it was kind of like, okay, done that. What else do I want to do? Because I always like doing things, learning new things, meeting new people, doing and just exploring new avenues that I haven't been down before. In the particle physics world, my as an undergraduate, I was helping build detectors for the collider experiments at Fermilab, and then when I went to grad school, spent a little bit of time up in the Sudan mine, helping out with some proton decay experiments before going off to Brookhaven National Lab, where I actually did my PhD thesis on hadron physics. And then as a postdoc, I was working on E plus E minus collider physics at the CLEO collaboration that was centered in Cornell. And then as a postdoc, I was working at Fermilab on some hyperon physics, and then eventually moved into neutrino physics. So every time it would be time for me to sign up and join a new experiment, I was actually doing new physics.
Right.
As opposed to many people in my community who repeat their thesis experiment again and again and again and again. And they just stay and do the similar type of physics for their entire career. My career, I was just exploring and bouncing around doing many different types of physics. And then at some point, I realized that I could make a bigger difference by helping facilitate other people's success. And I decided that that's what I would do instead.
Yeah, I think in the field of like biology, molecular biology, where I work in like genetic disease and RNA biology, people can study a specific disease or a specific type of RNA processing for their whole career, but never just repeating the same experiment tweaked differently.
Well, that's an exaggeration.
I know. I was like, how do you get new information from that? But I think it's interesting because the scientific mind tends to be so in the weeds, like we have a specialty and we know everything about all of that, and then to have to step back from dispassionate data to human beings, full of their eccentricities, sounds a little challenging to me.
Well, it wasn't an immediate transition because in my role on Diabay, a lot of what I was doing is working with people from different groups and trying to coordinate the activities between lots of different groups. As well as different cultures. And working in China was really an experience for me because I quickly realized that they don't act or behave like Americans at all. And,
right.
And I mean, just culturally, they just have a different way of going about and doing things. And there were a number of times when we were in collaboration, the full collaboration meeting where all the Americans are there and all the Chinese are there. And the American colleagues are looking at the Chinese colleagues and asking certain questions in a certain style, in a certain fashion. And I would look at my American friends and I would just say, you can't ask the question that way. It's just culturally you have to approach it from a different perspective. And
give me an example.
Oh, gosh.
Is it just like phrasing or?
Oftentimes, yeah. Sometimes you just can't be as direct as you might be. And Americans are very direct.
I have found that people from China are incredibly direct.
In a different way.
Yeah.
In a very different way. There are certain things that you can't challenge. It's a very hierarchical society. And I'll give you this example. So there was a low-level American engineer and a low-level Chinese engineer who were talking to each other about a particular project they were both working on. And the American engineer was looking at the Chinese design and said, that's not the optimum way of doing this. And the Chinese engineer said, yeah, I know. It's like, well, why are you doing it that way? And it's like, well, my boss wants me to do it this way. Well, tell your boss that there's a better way. No.
I see. Yeah. Whereas here we have that individualistic mentality. I can tell you I never felt more American until I was living in Europe. And then I was like, oh, I'm an American.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. No, it's true. All the societies are a little bit different. Hey, I just wanted to run back. You asked a question at the very beginning, and I never answered it, is, in some sense, a pathway from being a young scientist, even an undergraduate student. And I guess what I tried to do along the pathway is just always do my best. Whatever task I was given, it's like, how do I take this task and do the best job that I can do with it? And then over the years, you build up a reputation. And so how did I end up as a postdoc being physicist in charge? Well, the senior faculty looked at me and said, we can trust that guy because look at the work he's been doing.
And he knows how to jiggle cables.
And I know how to jiggle cables. I knew which cables were plugged in where. So all I guess the best advice I can give, especially to younger students who are getting started, is just focus on what's in front of you, do the best possible job, and trust me, people will notice. And when people notice that you're doing things correctly and you're doing them well, they will reward you. And then, offers for, promotion and positions will follow. Not 100%, but I think that's the best path.
Yeah, and do something you're passionate about, not something you think you should do, right?
Absolutely, because that's a big part of it, is don't try to do what you think the other people want you to do, but listen to your inner voice.
Right, because you're going to be miserable stuck in a career if you don't like what you're doing.
Exactly.
Well, you've been listening to Science Coast. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed are the speaker's own and do not represent the views, thoughts, and opinions of Lewis University. The material and information presented here is for general information purposes only. The Lewis University name in all forms and abbreviations are the property of its owner, and its use does not imply endorsement of or opposition to any specific organization, product, or service. This podcast was produced in the WLRA podcast studios at Lewis University. Visit lewisu.edu for more information about Lewis University. I'm Mallory Havens, and I'm with
Chris White.
Bye.
Bye.